Assassin's Creed Valhalla is the most successful individual game out of the entire franchise that it comes from. But if you were to try to search online for people talking about its story, you wouldn't find much, if anything at all. Don't get me wrong, this game has a lot, and I mean a lot, of reviews, many of them remade by the same people with the benefit of time to help them to hone their perspectives. There's nothing wrong with that, but here I specifically want to talk about the story. After playing the game front to back for about 5 times, I admit it's a bit of a guilty pleasure at this point. I have come to resonate with the story in a really big way. I felt like I could relate to Eivor, but it seems to me that the consensus on this character and on this game's narrative as a whole is that it's mediocre at best. I've even heard that the story is straight up just bad. I think that whether or not the game is good or bad is a whole other conversation, and I tend to agree with the popular opinion that the game is fun but objectively not really that good of a game. But for the story, on the other hand, and the character of Eivor Varinsdottir, I want to plead the case that these are actually good, even if there are issues with the game that they're attached to. If you haven't played Valhalla before, I just want to warn you that this video is going to spoil the hell out of you, because I can't really talk about the story without talking about the story. That being said though, a decent amount of the video isn't going to have any spoilers in it, so I'm going to put a timestamp on the screen so you know which parts of the video will have spoilers so you can skip them. The story doesn't have a lot of discussion around it online in the first place that I can find, but out of what I have seen, the common issues people have with the way that the story is delivered is firstly, the character of Eivor themselves not being a character that you can relate to. Secondly, that the arc storytelling structure makes the story feel packed full of filler content. And finally, the fact that different decision making leads to a story that is less able to have a coherent point. I'm going to try to explain each of these points individually because there's quite a bit to unpack here. I think that the character of Eivor Varinsdottir is actually pretty incredibly misunderstood by most people. At least most of the people I hear talking about her. Yes, Eivor is a her. Her name is literally Eivor. It's a feminine name, the same way Maria or Lucy are feminine names, and her surname is literally Varinsdottir. Varinsdottir. You see? Though I completely understand if you can only see Eivor as a man, if you only played through Valhalla with that setting. I've played both ways, and personally, I also find the voice actor for male Eivor to have done a better job overall, conveying the personality and emotion. But even with that being said, Eivor is still a woman, in canon and in common sense. But I have seen 2 very different views of Eivor that I believe miss the mark. This could be because of the way that the game is designed, so people might feel personality more from gameplay than from actual story moments and dialogue, and the way that the character acts in different situations. Well, I definitely get that. I don't agree that it's a good way to assess a character's personality. Edward Kenway and Shay Patrick Cormac are damn near identical in gameplay, but their personalities are very different, and you can see that through paying attention to their story moments and dialogue in game. The first take I see on Eivor's personality is that she doesn't have a personality at all, because of the fact that she could be seen as an insert of the person holding the controller, since the person holding the controller gets to make the decisions for her. The idea behind this is that if Eivor is not allowed to make her own decisions, then how could we ever know which decision she would truly make in that scenario? That point is honestly fair enough, and in that essence is actually why I typically prefer story-based games be completely devoid of any player input when it comes to the story itself, and instead the player's decisions should be reserved to the gameplay itself. Unfortunately, my favorite story game of all time shoots this idea down dead, making me reconsider this whole concept. Red Dead Redemption 2, to avoid spoilers, actually has 4 distinct endings with distinct emotional weights associated with them, all dependent on the decisions you make throughout the game. And at the end of the game, just to keep things simple, there is heavy emphasis on player input when it comes to how the story is going to play out and how the character of Arthur Morgan is going to evolve. But people who have played Red Dead 2 know that regardless of who Arthur Morgan is at the end of the game essentially ends the exact same way regardless of which of the 4 endings you get. How can I sit here and say that this game has 4 distinct endings and in the same breath say that they all end the same way? It comes down to a philosophy of life that recognizes that all of our lives are limited and will have an overall small impact on the universe regardless of who we choose to be in our lives, but you still get to decide the kind of person you want to be anyway. That small comfort may not amount to anything in the physical world, but in our hearts it makes a big difference. So it doesn't matter that all 4 endings are functionally the same, because emotionally they are very different because of who you let Arthur Morgan become. I am not saying that this is the only lesson in Red Dead 2. There's a lot, and I'm also not saying that it's the same lesson in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I'm only using this story game that is widely considered to be one of the greatest stories told in a video game to express the point that a story can be told effectively, not only despite of player input, but sometimes because of it. In the case of Eivor's decisions, the weight of the decisions made in-game are always ones made more difficult by the context we are given before it comes time to actually make the decision. We have two options, but we are given a lot of reason to choose either option. It is done like this on purpose to make the decision difficult for the player, as a storytelling method to make the player more aware of how difficult the decision is for Eivor too. These are the kinds of decisions that could genuinely go either way, so it's not a case of which decision Eivor would make and which decision the player would make. It's more that Eivor would genuinely make either decision and is struggling alongside the player to make the decision to allow for a more emotional connection to the player. Alongside that, Eivor as a character is deeply conflicted, making her decisions more difficult to make overall regardless. She has the voice of Odin in her ear all the time, trying to convince her to basically be more like him. And we see in cutscenes where we don't have any decisions to make, her sometimes agreeing with him, but far more often acting in total opposition to what he advises. Here, she shows her ability to make her own decisions, even though sometimes Odin does get to her. In some of the difficult decisions the player has, Odin will mess with you and Eivor too, but by this point, it is already established that Eivor can make her own decisions. Sometimes defies Odin and sometimes lets Odin get to her. So when it's time for you to make your own choices, you are not making Eivor into yourself, you are instead tipping the scales in favor of either Eivor's natural instincts or Odin's influence. And through learning what decisions Eivor would make without you and paying attention to what Odin says, you learn their opinions well enough to be able to know which decision is associated with each character. The other take I see on Eivor's personality is honestly one that I respect quite a bit less than the one before. The idea that Eivor is just some brutish berserker with no nuance or dimensionality to her personality. I think this perspective is pretty likely just because most people playing the game come from very different cultures than the culture that Eivor comes from. In modern Western culture, violence is typically thought of as sinful, regardless of the reason, to the point where when violence is necessary, it is often spoke of as though it is something that must be done reluctantly, if at all. The culture Eivor comes from has a very different relationship with violence, but just because it's different doesn't make it less valid. Both cultures being compared view violence as necessary in different situations, but it does not see as taboo or sinful within the lens of Eivor's culture. For them, it's only a normal part of life, so there's no point in being squirmish about it. In both cultures, bravery is revered and cowardice is a sin. For Eivor's culture, being ready for violence is one aspect of bravery, and being unready for violence is one aspect of cowardice. It is not that they necessarily believe all situations must be solved with violence, or that they always chase violence when they don't have to, but that they consider it as just as valid an option as all other approaches to problem solving, because they aren't weighed down by a taboo being placed on violence. This isn't me saying I agree. This isn't even me saying that this is an accurate representation of Old Norse culture, but this is the culture shown in the game's world, and my explanation of it to give some much needed context. In this game, we see multiple examples of people from the same cultural upbringing as Eivor that would unquestionably be considered brutes, to be overly violent. But the thing is that Eivor agrees that those characters are brutish and overly violent. How can somebody from the same culture disagree with the approach of somebody from the same culture? Well, that's super easy. Within a culture, people are not all the same. They have many things in common, especially the mindsets and beliefs that they grew up around. That doesn't disclude them from having their own personalities. Think of it in terms of your own life. I'm sure you have your own beliefs, whether they be religious or philosophical or whatever. And I'm sure you've heard from people or interacted with other people who have the same or similar beliefs as you. Do you have the exact same personality as everyone you agree with on certain things? Of course not, because individuals, even if they do have cultural influence incorporated into their overall character. Eivor does like to fight, likes the glory won from an honorable fight, but is also a poet who takes great care to speak the language of her heart through words. She cares deeply for the people she loves, and she avoids what she believes to be unnecessary violence. Two of the primary struggles in her narrative is Eivor trying to navigate around an overly violent violent brute, trying her best to get them to calm down so that there can be peace. It is through these struggles in particular that she shows she is capable of engaging with her own culture critically, deciding for herself how she will embody the values she grew up with and which parts she doesn't agree with. She can sometimes be seen proudly representing her culture in dialogue and other times criticizing it, and this isn't contradictory at all because you can be proud of your heritage and still criticize it. This is a pretty normal thing, and to criticize that would be kind of weird. Kind of like the whole
"You criticize society, yet you participate in society"
meme, as if people should be mocked for wanting to improve the things they love. Point is, Eivor is a layered, multi-dimensional character just like any living person would be. She's a warrior, a poet, and a caring community member. The criticism I understand best out of all of this story's delivery is the arc system, where each chapter of the story is divided into a portion of the map with its own self-contained story as a part of the larger narrative. You're usually given a certain amount at a time, and you can choose which order you do them in, and that gives way to a very unfortunate storytelling blockage. Let's say we have two arcs. Let's call them the New York arc and the California arc. If you have the choice to go to either before the other one, then you could also choose the other way around as well. So, if Eivor were to go to New York and get character development there before going to California, then in California, that character development would need to be present. But if Eivor went to California first and thus didn't get the character development she would have gotten in New York yet, then it wouldn't make sense for that character development to be shown yet. So the two solutions to this are that the California arc in this hypothetical either needs to have two different versions depending on the order you choose the locations in, or you simply don't give any character development to Eivor in these arcs. That doesn't mean that all of the arcs in Valhalla don't give character development. In fact, I'm pretty sure most of them are important. However, it will mean that there will be arcs that don't serve Eivor's narrative directly. Valhalla's way of not letting this be worse than it is by making the completion of an arc that furthers Eivor's character development unlock the next arc that furthers Eivor's character development. So that you can't choose them before the story wants you to. So why even have the other arcs then? Well, Eivor's goal throughout the bulk of the game is to gain alliances for the Raven clan to bolster the clan's influence across the four kingdoms of England. To that aim, every part of England has to be visited so that Eivor can either make an alliance with the established political leader of that area or to help install a new leader in that area in exchange for an alliance. As standalone stories, these are enjoyable enough, but some of them are definitely filler just to pad out more of the map because the narrative itself doesn't actually need the whole map. It wouldn't be so big a deal if you didn't need to complete some of these filler arcs to unlock more of the narratively important arcs. If this is your criticism of the story, then I have absolutely no disagreement with you. I do think that this system does unnecessarily bloat the runtime of the game and can very easily lead to the feeling of lost momentum when you are getting deep into the story. Just when it's getting good and you want to know what happens next, you're forced to play a filler arc to progress to the next real story moment. If you wanted to avoid this feeling after playing through the game 5 times fully, this was the best method I had for maintaining interest. You start your journey in England the way Sigurd tells you to meet him in Leicestershire after making alliances. At first, your only option is Grantbridgeshire, but the general rule of thumb to me is to pay attention to what Sigurd and Randvi tells you and avoid wherever Sigurd is on the map as long as you can until the place that Sigurd's at is the only remaining option left on the map. This way, when it gets down to it, you are going to be going from story point to story point when it matters most. I know that it will sound weird to actively just avoid Sigurd all the time, but this actually plays into one of Eivor's primary character struggles in the story, so it will end up paying off well. Again, avoiding spoilers as best I can here. There is, however, a benefit I realize to all of the arcs in the game as a whole, so it's not all for nothing. There is actually a narrative benefit if you take them all as a collective rather than individually. Sigurd is the Jarl of the Raven clan. That's like the king or chieftain, and Eivor is the second in command as Sigurd's adopted sibling. Sigurd spends a lot of the time away from the clan trying to establish his influence in England for the benefit of him and his clan. Eivor seems to let it slip from time to time across the length of the story that her not seeing Sigurd much and the clan not seeing Sigurd much leads to a sense of disconnection. Eivor that goes out and leads the alliance plan across England. It's Eivor that builds everybody's houses and helps out all of the members of the clan, new and old, as the Jarl should. It's Eivor that gives fair judgment when Sigurd isn't anywhere around to do it. And while Eivor loves her brother and Eivor misses her brother, Eivor can't help but develop a sneaking resentment towards the fact that Sigurd seems to be chasing personal glory while she is chasing glory for the whole clan. Eivor, in reality, is doing the work of Jarl while Sigurd isn't, and subconsciously, Eivor feels that she should be in charge since she basically already is. I say this feeling as subconscious, but a couple different characters call her out on it because they can tell despite the fact that she's obviously trying to hide these feelings. It is in all of these arcs, every single one of them, that we get to see Eivor interacting with people who aren't from her clan, and she gets to act more freely as herself without the expectation riding on her to know her place as second in command. She carries herself as a leader and it suits her well, and throughout all of England she gets to experience living more freely within her own identity and her own desires because of all the expectations of her clan not weighing her down. She even shows more sides of herself to different people because she is more than just a Vikinger, more than just a Norse, more than just a pagan. She is a full person with full access to her wheels of thoughts and feelings, and by interacting with a variety of different kinds of people, she can outwardly express more aspects of herself. She is not necessarily developing in each arc. However, in all of the arcs as a whole, she is learning to be more comfortable in all aspects of herself. You would of course be forgiven for not noticing this, because in such a huge game, these are very small details to be paying attention to, but it's these small details that I'm always looking for in stories that make me appreciate way more than if I didn't pay attention. So far, I've been only talking about the criticisms I know about and can think of when it comes to Valhalla's story, but there is so much more to talk about that I haven't seen anybody talking about. Not critically, not casually, not in any way. You'd think by the way people talk about Valhalla that there's no story at all. It is at this point in the video that I'm going to go very heavy into spoiler territory. So if you want to experience the story of this game for yourself, then skip to this point in the video. By then, the spoilers will all be over. Of course, if you haven't experienced the story for yourself but don't care, then keep in mind that I will be explaining the story from my perspective, and it may likely be leaving things out for the sake of preventing the video from being too long, or even maybe just because I forgot to talk about something. Either way, this video isn't going to be a replacement for playing the game yourself. Eivor's story begins when Kjotve the Cruel and his clan attacks the Raven clan, and Eivor's father Varin believes that the clan would not survive a full battle against Kjotve's men, so he makes a deal to allow Kjotve to kill him unarmed in exchange for Kjotve calling off the attack. In this culture, dying unarmed is considered a dishonorable death, and that means that you do not get to go to this culture's version of heaven, Valhalla. To Varin, this was a sacrifice he was willing to make for his family and his clan, but Kjotve did not hold up his end of the bargain. He continued his attack after killing Varin, killed Eivor's mother, both parents killed right in front of Eivor's eyes, and Sigurd had to grab Eivor and pull him onto his horse to save him by running away from the village. Eivor fell off the horse and was attacked by wolves, but survived the encounter in a way that we are not directly shown, but it is implied that another personality took over her body to defeat the wolf. Eivor had a permanent scar on her neck that earned her the nickname Eivor Wolf-Kissed for having survived a wolf encounter as a child. In this culture, physical scars are marks of honor. It is considered glorious to have survived that, and it is a visible part of your life story for all to see. But in this culture, dishonor is a stain that is just as difficult to remove as a scar. The dishonor Eivor felt from Varin's sacrifice weighed deeply upon her, and she was not able to overcome it as she grew up. She felt great expectation from her cultural upbringing to right the wrong that was done to her father, but she could not understand why her father would willingly give up his honor like that. To right this wrong, Eivor was hyper-focused on getting revenge on Kjotve and his clan, but Sigurd's father, who adopted her, is making it difficult for her, not letting her war against Kjotve until Sigurd basically forced the issue for her to his dad. At this point, the plot is mainly focused on Eivor just following what Sigurd wants. She looks up to him and feels very close to him as if they were blood siblings. As long as she gets her honor back, that's all good. And Sigurd wants that for her as well. Sigurd just got back from traveling the world and has a much different perspective on it all. Being raised a prince, he always felt that it was his destiny to be king. Since Sigurd always supported what Eivor wanted, Eivor always wanted to support what Sigurd wanted too. But Eivor was getting strange visions of Odin, so went to a seer to find answers. The seer was able to help Eivor have a more detailed vision, where she found Sigurd at the top of a mountain with a giant wolf head obscured by a fog and Sigurd's arm cut off. The seer explained that this vision's meaning was that like Odin betrayed Tyr, Eivor too would betray Sigurd. Eivor simply could not accept this. She could not see herself betraying him at all. So now she not only had the weight of cultural expectation, but now had the weight of seemingly having to fight against her own fate. In Norse myth, people's lives are predetermined, so there is no point in fighting against it. But Odin's arrogance was so great that he felt that he could fight against his own fate to be killed by a wolf at Ragnarok. It is ironic then that in her attempt to be different from Odin by not betraying her family, she ends up being just like Odin in her defiance against destiny. After this vision, Eivor's vision of Odin becomes less of a mysterious now and then thing, and Odin just straight up talks to her so often that she has to get used to it and talk to him as if he were really there. But she can't talk openly about it because she's trying to avoid thinking about the fate that was revealed to her by the seer. When Eivor finally kills Kjotve, Eivor doesn't feel that her father's honor has been restored, so she holds onto that weight and needs to find new things to fight against in order to feel closure. Sigurd's father sells him out by giving his kingdom to King Harald, the kingdom that Sigurd was promised he would one day rule. Sigurd, with his newfound worldly experience, quickly moves on to chasing royal rule in other kingdoms, and Eivor latches on and makes Sigurd's goal her own reason for fighting. They sail to England with the rest of their clan, excluding their father, and make a new settlement for their clan to rebuild. Their plan was to take over all of England and make Sigurd king of all of it, before then going elsewhere and continuing their glory path. Sigurd rides off to meet the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, a legendary Vikinger, to see if there can be an alliance gained between them. And Sigurd tells Eivor to go out across England and make as many alliances as she can. But for her, it is clear to me that she is less interested in the work of making Sigurd king and more interested in helping the Ravensthorpe settlement and its people to thrive, and more interested still in traveling across England and securing alliances all around it. I had played the game a few times before I realized that Eivor wasn't making any efforts to actually increase Sigurd's power in the land, only securing the Raven clan's safety in the land. She will often say that it's all she's working towards, showing that her efforts to helping Sigurd is just an excuse to use for her to do what she really wants to do. People from all over England are helped by Eivor, not Sigurd. The Raven clan is represented and defended by Eivor, not Sigurd. The Ravensthorpe settlement is developed and supported by Eivor, not Sigurd. And all across England, kingdoms pledge their friendship and loyalty to Eivor, not Sigurd. Dag is a big dumb brute. However, he can see through Eivor, and the game makes him out to be an idiot so that the player has the option of discrediting the things he has to say. This is because Eivor is ignoring what Dag is saying about her, discrediting him, despite the fact that she really should be listening, because it doesn't matter who says something, good or bad, dumb or smart. If what they say is true, then it is true. Dag is constantly calling Eivor out for seeking her own glory and wanting to lead the clan instead of Sigurd. Eivor can dismiss this as much as she likes, but she reveals throughout her journey that she resents how absent Sigurd can be. And like we talked about already, the result of her actions that the player isn't choosing is that she is in fact bolstering her own glory, not Sigurd's. Eivor and the player can make excuses all they like, but the truth has to catch up eventually. Where the truth starts to become more and more obvious is when Sigurd is imprisoned by the madwoman Folke. Eivor feels just as much warrior as everyone else in the clan, but the way that Sigurd is saved is entirely up to Eivor herself. It is her responsibility. The clan has scouts searching for Sigurd, and Eivor becomes more and more stressed for her brother because having resentment towards his absence doesn't mean she cares about him any less. But Dag sees that she herself is not actively searching as well, leaving that up to just the scouts. Dag feels that if they all went immediately to find Sigurd, that would be more efficient. Of course, there are valid reasons to say Dag is wrong, like the kingdom holding Sigurd. Wessex is far more powerful than the Raven clan's total might, but as we see, Eivor has made enough alliances across England that isn't as much of a factor. When the time comes to save Sigurd, once Eivor knows where he is, she rallies the combined forces of all the Raven clan's allies, and they are able to successfully save Sigurd. So then, if that was the case, then why didn't Eivor go out and find Sigurd right away? In gameplay, we aren't allowed to go save him right away. This isn't because of some developer trying to screw Eivor over. This is Eivor's immutable decision being shown to us through gameplay. It is not that Eivor wanted Sigurd to be captured or tortured or anything. In fact, Eivor has more emotional reason to see Sigurd safe than anybody else. However, it shows a flaw in Eivor's mindset, that she is so hyper-focused on distracting herself from the weight of the world, so focused on ignoring the things that hold her down, that she can't see things more clearly. The result is that she kills Dag for challenging her authority. And the whole Raven clan sees her in a way she really doesn't like, a way that makes her feel that she could not live up to the expectation that they had for her. She could not live up to the expectation her culture had of her, and she could not avoid her fate of betraying Sigurd. She gets defensive, pleading that she wants Sigurd to be safe more than anyone, and she will save him as soon as possible, but before this point, she had not been trying her best, and she knows it. Before Sigurd was captured, He was beginning to act very strangely, in a way Eivor could not understand. Instead of being focused on the goal that they had come to England for, Sigurd was chasing his own personal glory. It is for this reason that I do believe Eivor's resentment towards him is justified personally, because they had made a great commitment together, pledged to be equals, yet Sigurd had been convinced by his assassin friend Basim that he was more than just a human. Sigurd enjoyed the idea of some inherent glory that he was born with that he did not have to earn, latched onto this idea of being above mankind, and walked that path instead of the path of ruling England that he had planned together with Eivor. The way he acted made him speak to Eivor differently, at times belittling him, dismissing Eivor's questions, questioning Eivor's loyalty, all because he believed that he was above humanity, including Eivor. He even stopped involving himself in the active conquering of England, so that the only progress that the Raven clan made on that front had nothing to do with Sigurd and everything to do with Eivor's expedition. It is this chase that led Sigurd to being captured by Folke in the first place. When Eivor saved Sigurd from Folke, it had turned out that Folke had tortured Sigurd in order to awaken his memories from a past life. Quick lore dump for anyone that isn't deep into Assassin's Creed lore. In the Assassin's Creed universe, the world was inhabited by intelligent beings before humankind. Smarter, larger, longer lifespans, they even facilitated the evolution of the Homo sapiens species, or modern humans, the same way that we humans facilitated the evolution of dogs from wolves. This advanced people, called the Isu, ruled humans and made them slaves for them. Isu had technology that had a wide variety of great applications, like spheres that could create illusions and influence human minds into servitude, weapons, clothes, and trinkets with special properties that could be used for battle or medicine. These technologies are often the focal point of Assassin's Creed stories, with the villains often trying to use these ancient artifacts to have control over civilization, while the heroes are trying to prevent them from doing so, as well as stopping any other methods of controlling people. The Isu people went extinct several thousands of years ago due to a big calamity, but since there was some overlap between the existence of the Isu and mankind, humans around the world remembered the Isu through stories, and as the generations went on, the stories would change and become more fantastical, and this is how the Assassin's Creed universe explains mythology. So in this universe, the Norse pantheon of gods were real individuals who lived, but they weren't actually gods, just an older civilization of those who came before. Through Folke torturing Sigurd, he was able to find out that he was the reincarnation of the Norse god of justice and war, Tyr. The trauma of being tortured and the shock of the revelation caused Sigurd's behavior to become more intense as well. Back at the settlement, he got incredibly angry at Eivor for all she had done in his absence, and safe to say, it wasn't the bright and warm homecoming Eivor had hoped it would be. Sigurd, feeling justified in his godly status, began ruling the Raven clan less fairly, and when Eivor questioned him, he would judge Eivor for arrogance and a lack of respect for her Jarl. Sigurd, now more than ever, lorded above his people and his sister, in stark contrast from the equality he spoke of when they first arrived in Varinsdottir. With all of this lording, however, Sigurd was also reluctant to actually do any of the work of ruling, leaving Eivor to have to fill in the blanks, only for Sigurd to become enraged at her for doing so. With home now becoming an emotional war zone for Eivor, Eivor now has even more reason to go out and seek alliances and whatever else will get her away from this abusive behavior. You can now begin to see here that Eivor's subconscious feelings against Sigurd are totally justified, because Sigurd is being a total asshole, and to be honest, he has been growing more and more asshole-like since Basim told him that he was more than just a human. I believe that Sigurd clung onto this idea because he had a great sense of ego. Ego born from a lack of acknowledgement from his father, who had always made snide remarks about him behind his back and to his face, and who did not have enough respect to ask him if he was okay with having his birthright taken away from him for a greater cause. His father built him up like that and then broke him down. That is probably going to leave some type of a rift in your psyche. Sigurd traveled the world in search of his own glory the same way Eivor is doing now, and when he returned, he lost all that he had come back for. Anyone with even a bit of ego would love to be told that they are a god, but somebody with a type of wound that Sigurd was trying to fill would absolutely eat that up and run with it. True or not? In this case though, Sigurd is right. It is revealed to us through optional world missions and through a flashback arc where we get to see the lives of the Isu that the Norse gods are based on, that Odin was able to find an elixir that would allow any who consumed it to have their identities added to the human gene pool, so that even though they will die in the calamity, they will be reborn as humans eventually. Here, of course, was one of the Isu that drank from the elixir with Odin. In case you you have played Black Flag, either the original or the remake, this is actually the same situation that happened with Captain Bartholomew Roberts, who is also a reincarnation of an Isu, and these reincarnations are called sages. So, that would make Sigurd Styrbjörnsson a sage too. If you remember the vision that Eivor had, it showed Sigurd's arm being chopped off, and he calls Eivor Havi instead of her name, and there is a huge wolf. The seer tells Eivor that Odin is with her and that she will betray Sigurd just like Odin betrayed Tyr. In the arc where we played through Odin's memories, we see Odin tricking the great wolf Fenrir by having Tyr put his arm into the wolf's mouth as a sign of friendship, so that Odin can bind Fenrir to the ground to prevent Fenrir from attacking anybody, especially himself. But the pain of the binding made Fenrir bite Tyr's arm off. Now we see Sigurd with the exact same deformity, arguably because of Eivor's lack of haste when it came to saving him. If you have already played the game, then you know where I'm going with this, and hopefully I have explained it well enough for any of you who haven't played it. I didn't care if you were spoiled, but it is at this point that we have had enough implications that Eivor is the sage of the Isu Odin, explaining why Odin's personality is constantly with her in her mind, talking to her, egging her on, trying to make her more like him. The fate that the seer told Eivor that she would betray Sigurd is a fate carried over from Odin, who betrayed Tyr. In fighting against this fate, she is fighting to choose her own destiny. She is fighting to be herself, not Odin. But like I said before, this fight in itself is just like Odin's fight against his own destiny. When he was told that he would be killed by a wolf, he did everything he could to avoid that fate, but it came anyway. It is at this point that I now struggle to care about the alliances across England and the fight against Wessex, and somewhat I feel like this is by design. After being exposed to such things and wanting to learn more about it and where Eivor fits into it, it does feel kinda lowly to be going around England doing what we've already been doing for the first part of the game. Even if personally I do enjoy each of these arcs, I think this is because Sigurd hasn't cared about it for a long time. He only cares about ascending to his destined godhood, while Eivor still cares deeply about Ravensthorpe, so wants to make the settlement thrive as much as possible, but she also cares about her brother and wants to understand him and repair the rift between them that has grown since they arrived in England. Sigurd eventually speaks to Eivor, admitting that he knows that they've been drifting apart, but that will all be understood soon. All will be mended, forgiven. They would have everything they've ever wanted as long as Eivor trusts him just one more time by following him back to Norway, where he will show Eivor something. Eivor is keen to fix things between her and Sigurd and wants to understand him, so of course she agrees to go to Norway with him. Their first step in Norway is to visit Sigurd's father, so that Sigurd could rub his success in his face, showing that as much as Sigurd believes he is above it all, he is still not over the betrayal he felt from his father. If he were really over it, then he obviously wouldn't be going to rub it in his father's face, would he? But this was not the true cause of the trip to Norway. There was still one place left to go. Before going, Eivor finally reveals to us and to Sigurd that she too believes that she is like Sigurd, that she understands more than she lets on about Sigurd's connection to Tyr, and she has also had the personality of Odin with her the whole time. I believe that all these years, Eivor had been trying to ignore Odin or discredit the idea that it was in fact the real Odin, out of a desire to avoid being like Odin. Now that they are back in Norway, and Sigurd is promising that everything will make sense, she feels that there's no point in denying it any further. Sigurd takes her to an old cave that ends up being an old Isu building that Sigurd remembers from his previous life as Tyr. The huge room they enter seems to be a far colder and more metallic version of the Mimir's well from Odin's memories, showing that Eivor viewing Odin's memories was filtered through her own idea of history based on the mythology that she was raised on. In here, Sigurd shows Eivor a machine that connects to both Eivor and Sigurd, and they wake up in what looks to be Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, the version of heaven that is part of Norse mythology. I think that this is probably one of the best ending sequences I've ever played through in a game, because it symbolically represents the whole point of the story. Eivor wakes up, goes into the hall where people are feasting, and goes out into the field and fights as much as she wants. The day ends, she wakes up again, goes into the hall where all the people are feasting, and goes out into the field and fights as much as she wants. But Sigurd loses his arm again, and Eivor sees who she thinks is her father Varin. Since Varin died in a way that her culture deems to be dishonorable, he should not be in Valhalla. So, the next day she wakes up, goes into the hall and looks for Varin but can't find him, goes into the field of battle and can't find him there either. And of course Sigurd loses his arm again, but isn't upset because no injuries are permanent. permanent in Valhalla. But you can see that Sigurd is only trying to convince himself that he isn't upset, because no matter how much he tries to ignore his injury, it reappears exactly where it was before, exactly the same way as before every time, because he has not truly healed. This is symbolic of the fact that everything he has been doing throughout the story is a distraction preventing him from healing the real wound in his heart left by his father. Eivor tells Sigurd that she keeps thinking she sees Varin, but it ends up not being him. So the next day, Sigurd uses his power as Tyr to bring Varin to Valhalla, but Eivor is incredibly doubtful of this. She asks Varin a question to test if it's the real him, and he answers falsely. So she throws a knife at him, and he is revealed to be an illusion. Eivor knows that the rules of Valhalla are unbreakable, so there is no way that Varin can ever be in Valhalla, even though she has wanted her whole life for him to have not lost his honor as he died. Sigurd is content to delude himself as much as it takes to feel better about himself, but Eivor has seen too much, learned different perspectives, healed enough from her embodying her true self for the lie of this Valhalla to trick her. She becomes aware that this Valhalla isn't real, so she stops seeing it as a perfect place the way she did before. It looks buggy, it looks messed up, it looks like a facade. She has to convince Sigurd that it isn't real, and Sigurd reveals his true inner feelings, that in the real world he's nobody, but in Valhalla he is somebody. This whole time, Sigurd has been trying to become somebody glorious to fill a hole in his heart that made him feel unimportant. But Eivor tells him that he has people that care about him, and that it isn't too late. There is always other glories to earn as long as you keep living, but there is no real glory in this fake Valhalla, only illusion that makes you feel glorious, but is no replacement for real glory. As soon as we meet Eivor and Sigurd as children, up until this point, they have both been chasing false glories in order to distract themselves from truly healing themselves. For Sigurd, he was traveling the world, then ruling Fornburg, then ruling England, then becoming a god among men, and for Eivor, he was killing Kjotve, then helping Sigurd to rule England, then helping people all around England and discovering herself. The difference is that Sigurd was only deluding himself to ignore his plan, while Eivor was deluding herself in order to give her an excuse to heal her pain without worrying about fate or expectations. She had not healed her greatest pains, however, she had been healing by being free to be herself around new people, and by leading the Raven clan the way she wanted, with kindness and equality. She was walking in a healthy direction, with Odin trying to pull her backwards, while Sigurd was walking in an unhealthy direction, and both paths led them here to Valhalla, where they had to lay bare all of the hidden feelings that they had been keeping inside. The vulnerability that Sigurd shows in Valhalla, that he is more upset than he wants Eivor to believe, that his wounds affect him more than he is willing to admit, and that he feels he is nobody in the real world but somebody in Valhalla, gives Eivor an opportunity to share some of the wisdom that she had gained in her adventures in England with Sigurd, what she has learned about life, in order to convince Sigurd to leave Valhalla with her. But the Allfather had other plans. This entire time, Odin had planned out a whole scheme in order to get control over the body he inhabited when he was reincarnated, including getting Tyr to manipulate his own reincarnated vessel to bring Odin's vessel to Mimir's well to enter the Valhalla simulation. It was here that Odin would take over Eivor's body and rule it as his own, free to live again as he had before the calamity. Odin's efforts to make Eivor more like him were to make that transition easier, as easy as it had been for Tyr and Sigurd. But just as Odin was known for his wisdom, Eivor too was wise. Eivor and Odin fought inside their own mind, but as the fight continued, it was clear that Odin could not be damaged, and no matter how much Eivor would be damaged, she would be brought back to continue fighting anyway. Eventually, a door opened with Sigurd and her other loved ones on the other side, but it was clear that she could not make Odin leave her mind, so she had to leave the simulation, running away from the fight, throwing away her own honor. But no matter how many times she did it, Odin would pull her back by her axe so that she was not able to stop fighting him. If Eivor was to leave, she had to let go of the fight as a whole. Everything she was fighting against, expectations, fate, Odin, she had to stop fighting against it in order to be free. Let people expect things. You don't have to be weighed down by it. Let fate happen. You can still live your life how you want, regardless of what events will come eventually. Stop trying to beat the inner voice. It will always be there. Instead, accept that it's there and learn to live with it. You have to go into the menu, actively unequip the axe, which will make Eivor drop her axe in the simulation, and then Odin will have nothing to drag Eivor back with, because Eivor has officially stopped fighting. The axe represents the weight of her culture, of her people. The axe represents the weight of expectation, and by dropping the weight, she still has the expectation on her, but it's not weighing her down anymore. Eivor can walk towards the door, toward her loved ones, unbothered by Odin's demands. Eivor chooses to be a coward like her father, understanding that he was not truly a coward in the first place. Varin was trying to protect his family and his people, and there is nothing wrong with that. It was his culture that was wrong, and it was Odin that was wrong. So in deciding to do as her father did, putting down her weapon, she acknowledges that there is nothing wrong with doing so, and she finally approaches the door. He finally sees her parents welcoming her on the other side, because the pain she had been living with ever since the day that they had died has finally been overcome. Eivor knows happiness, and always had, but had been unable to truly see it because she let the weight of expectations hold her down. Finally accepting it, she is able to see all of the things she had. She had a happy and safe home. She had people who loved her. She had people who she loved. Odin tries to tell her that if she leaves him now, she becomes nothing, as though she is nothing without Odin. That with Odin, she would have wisdom, power, and glory. And he asks her, what more could she possibly need? Eivor, realizing how much power and glory had been holding her down, says that what she truly needs is everything except for those things. Everything else. And with that, Eivor is finally free from the eternal cycle. She broke a generational curse. Eivor wakes up from the simulation, seeing Basim holding Sigurd at blade point. It turns out Basim too was a sage, the sage of Loki, who Odin had done a lot of horrible things to. Basim had fully taken on the personality of Loki, the way Eivor had just refused to with Odin. This whole time, Basim had thought that Sigurd might be the sage of Odin, but it was here that it was revealed that it was Eivor all along. Basim only came with Sigurd to Norway and then England to find out for certain who the sage of Odin was, so that he could exact Loki's revenge against Odin. And now knowing that Eivor is the sage of Odin, he's ready to take his pound of flesh. Basim may or may not know that Eivor rejected Odin, and this portion of the story is less important to Eivor's individual story and more important to the overarching plot of Assassin's Creed lore, because it is implied that Basim really just orchestrated this so that he could be placed into the simulation in a way that nobody would try to get him out of it. But there is something to be said for the fact that Basim is the true opposite of Eivor here. That Basim allowed his past self to continue on with all of that pain instead of accepting it and moving on, as Eivor had. The perfect example of what Eivor would have become had she chosen differently. After defeating Basim, Eivor and Sigurd sit down to have a talk. Some aspects of this conversation will be different depending on some of the decisions you made throughout the game, though the end results as far as Eivor's development are concerned are the same regardless. Throughout the game, you are given many opportunities to betray Sigurd. All of them have options where you either do something Sigurd would agree with or something Sigurd would disagree with. Some of these decisions are actually worth thinking about, because simply appeasing what Sigurd would want is not always the moral thing to do. Sigurd judges two of the citizens of Ravensthorpe settlement unfairly, and Eivor can either agree with or disagree with the decision, and because of how unfair it is, you would be very much justified in disagreeing with him, though Sigurd would then see that as a betrayal, a demeaning of his authority. Through this example, you can see that it is not so black and white as just do whatever you think Sigurd would want you to do if you want a good ending. The more that you do something that he wouldn't want though, the more likely he is to choose not to return to England with you. Regardless though, even if you do everything the way you think he would want it, there is a betrayal that is immutable, a decision Eivor makes throughout the entire game that the player has no input over unless they decide to just stop playing the game entirely. Eivor stole Sigurd's dream of conquering England by going out across England by herself to gain alliances with everyone all across the land. This may not have been her intention, but that was the result. So no matter which way you play, the seer was right that Eivor would betray Sigurd, but once they have the discussion where Eivor and Sigurd air out their feelings and discuss betrayal and the distancing of their connection, it is not nearly as bad as Eivor had imagined it would be when she learned that it was her fate to betray him. Once she accepted her fate and talked about it once it had happened, it provided an opportunity for understanding, forgiveness, and a path forward. Even Sigurd not returning to England, Sigurd is not hateful of Eivor and understands that their paths diverged a long time ago, and that it was only the natural course of the universe. But in most playthroughs, Sigurd will come back home with you and will make you the Jarl's Kona of the Raven clan in his place. The point here, I believe, is that the things that weigh you down shouldn't be ignored, but they shouldn't be the only thing you focus on either. If you hyper-focus on solving some problems, you may neglect other important areas of your life. And if you ignore your problems, they are only going to remain and do damage to the other important areas of your life as well. For Sigurd, his issue was that he ignored his problem and tried to overcompensate for the things that he was feeling bad about instead of addressing them directly. Even at the end of the story, he still hasn't healed, but he is at least made to stop ignoring his internal struggle. Not the sage struggle, but the emotional struggle. I could go more in depth with Sigurd in another video, but the main focus of this video is Eivor's story, and for that purpose, Sigurd's character arc is only as important as far as it relates to Eivor's. Eivor's main issue was that in focusing on healing her own internal problems, she neglected her duty to her brother. She got a lot out of leading and supporting Ravensthorpe. She got a lot out of traveling and helping out the different peoples of England, but Sigurd ceased to be a priority, and that ended up causing a lot of pain between them. And no matter how the story ends for the player, Sigurd and Eivor's connection is going to be weaker at the end of the story than it is at the start, and it's the fault of both of them. But that's okay. You shouldn't be afraid of consequences like that, because they provide valuable teaching moments. The rest of the plot of the game isn't really important for the character arcs, and mainly just serves to give the player a sense of closure after having already gained alliances across the whole map. There's going to be some kind of payoff there, but by then, Eivor's character arc is realistically already over as soon as she sits down to talk with Sigurd after they leave Valhalla. Eivor's life doesn't become worse after she finishes realizing that she betrayed Sigurd, and in fact, it only improves overall. She leads a clan of people that she loves, that love her in return. Her clan is safe, and she is a successful and influential political figure in England. Odin offered her everything she lived her life thinking she wanted, and she rejected it because she discovered what she truly wanted and needed, and she already had it all along. At this point, I'm not going to be spoiling any more of the story, so welcome back everybody who skipped that part of the video, but to be honest, I don't know how much you're going to benefit from watching this video if you skipped over the story overview and my explanation for what I think the story means. So if you didn't want to be spoiled, I would probably recommend either playing the game yourself or watching an online playthrough of the game on YouTube or something. At this point, I want to talk about probably the most controversial aspect of this game. The fact that you do not, in any way, shape, or form, play as an assassin. Eivor does definitely assassinate people in the game, but she isn't a member of the philosophical movement of assassins. She's not a part of the organization that spans millennia and lives by the creed of the assassins. There have been a decent few games now where you don't play as an assassin for either the entire game or for the majority of the game, and funnily enough, Assassin's Creed 2 is one of them. Ezio isn't an assassin until the later part of the game. Until then, he acts like one and moves like one and assassinates like one, but isn't a part of the organization and doesn't live by the tenets and philosophies of the creed. But from playing through all of the Assassin's Creed games myself, I believe the franchise was never really about assassins in the first place. Of course, assassins are very much important, and I would prefer if the majority of Assassin's Creed games are led by assassin protagonists. But to me, Assassin's Creed isn't about the assassins, it's about the creed, hence why the series is called Assassin's Creed, not just assassins. It's about the creed, it's about the philosophy. The Assassin's Creed itself is that nothing is true and everything is permitted. This has been interpreted different ways by different assassins across history because it is such a wellspring of philosophical wisdom, but the modern day assassin Desmond Miles, who was raised as an assassin, did not feel that the assassins could uphold their own creed and exist at the same time. There is an inherent contradiction to the creed of the assassins and the existence of the assassins, a big enough contradiction that it may warrant its own whole video if you guys are into that kind of thing. But because of that contradiction, it can be important to explore alternative philosophies that are valid in achieving the same goal as the Assassin's Creed. The assassin's main goal is to liberate not just the bodies of the people, but also the minds of the people. The creed aims to assist in doing that by giving the assassin a mindset that breaks any chains that might be holding their mind down. But like I said, there are contradictions, so if there are other ways of freeing one's mind, they should at the very least be explored. I do not think that all of Ubisoft's attempts at showing non-assassin philosophies have been successful. In fact, sometimes it feels like they didn't even try. However, even so, it is important to keep in mind that if you believe there is only one valid way to live and think, then you are violating the creed's includes wisdom, and that includes whether you believe the Assassin's Creed is the one valid way to live and think. Eivor's way did end up helping her to free her own mind, despite her not living by assassin wisdom. And so I believe that in the overall collage of Assassin's Creed games, this one actually does fit into the picture much better than people give it credit for. But at the end of the day, can I call the Valhalla story a good story? I think that there are multiple valid perspectives you can have on this. I think many people would consider the story to be bad because of how much filler you have to get through to be able to even experience it. To me, all of that filler can be chalked up to just gameplay, because when the storytelling is in motion, it's very good and it's executed very well in my opinion. I got very emotionally invested, of course, with the only issue being that the filler could feel invasive. To be honest though, with my most recent playthrough, the arc order I talked about earlier in the video helped the story to feel a lot tighter and made the filler feel a lot less fillery, and more like a light break from the main events that would really only probably take a couple hours to finish. The filler arcs really aren't that long, thankfully, but I do think overall that the fact that I had to find an optimal path to make it feel good is an execution issue, and I do believe that a story should be evaluated not just in what it does well and what it does poorly, but in the actual execution of what it's doing. I've played, read, watched plenty of stories that if I were to evaluate the story itself, I could easily say that it was a good story, but they were executed so horribly that it didn't matter to me whether the story was good. And I've played, read, and watched stories that were just fine, nothing special, but because of how well they were executed, I got a lot out of them. I believe a story has to have some kind of lesson to tell to justify itself, and regardless of if the lesson is a good lesson, it's how well the lesson is conveyed, in my opinion, that defines how good the story is. There is no point in trying to tell somebody something if you are doing it in such a way that they aren't going to understand, which is often why I find so many of the most well appreciated stories are the ones that everybody can understand the meaning behind. With that in mind, I do think that even though I personally got a lot out of this story, in 6 years of being around, I have never seen people online talking about the story like I am doing in this video. If this were some old game from before story analysis was popular on YouTube, or some unpopular game that not too many people had played, I would understand. But this is the most successful Assassin's Creed game to date, and its story isn't being talked about. To me, that is at least some evidence that the execution of this story was not handled well enough. And of course, I could very easily be wrong, because I definitely got a lot out of this story, as you can see from this video. And it's not like YouTubers are representatives for everybody. It's possible that the YouTubers who have talked about this game either haven't played it before talking about it, or aren't the kind of people who like to analyze stories, or a mix of the two. And if that's the case, please let me know if this story resonated with you. That's really all it takes for a story to be good for me personally, for it to resonate with the person viewing it, regardless of if the message itself is a good one. I've seen plenty of well-crafted stories with points I believe to be wrong in my opinion, but if we're going to try to make an objective conclusion on whether or not Valhalla is a good story, that's probably going to depend on how well it was able to convey its message. And the only way I can know that is by seeing if the Assassin's Creed community agrees with what I'm saying, whether it be in response to this video, in the comments, or if others in the community with the platform voice their own feelings of the story to give an opportunity for their commenters to share their thoughts. I think it's entirely up to the community at large whether or not this story was done well, because the story itself, in my opinion, is good, but it doesn't matter how good it is if nobody picked up what it was putting down. So please guys, let me know in the comments whether you enjoyed the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Do you think Eivor is a well-written character? And while we're at it, did you prefer the character performance of male or female Eivor more? And if you want to see more deep dive videos like this, I've got a lot more on the way, so if you're interested, hit the sub, the bell, the like button while you're there. Have yourselves a good one guys, and I've been Undead, signing out.